So in this video, we're going to talk about the history of the field of entrepreneurship. Now, entrepreneurship is a relatively new field. Yes, it's true that Schumpeter was writing about entrepreneurship in the 30s with creative destruction, and if you really want to be technical, yes, Cantillon wrote, I think it was in 1754. He gave this definition of entreprendre, to take something in between, or in other words, an entrepreneur was somebody who had an excess of money and time and they invested it in some sort of activity. Those are true statements, but in terms of being a discipline that was regularly taught at the university, this is a relatively new phenomenon. In fact, most universities didn't even teach a class in entrepreneurship until the 1990s. Now, fortunately, since the early 2000s, there's been kind of an explosion in the interest in the field of entrepreneurship. There have been a whole slew of specialist research journals in entrepreneurship. In fact, entrepreneurship is now the largest division at the Academy of Management. That's the large conference that management academics attend. In fact, I think last time I checked, there were about 1,000 faculty in the Academy of Management Entrepreneurship Division. So it's really grown as a field. There's more and more entrepreneurship faculty. There are more and more PhD programs dedicated to entrepreneurship, including the one that I attended and graduated from. There are more and more MBA programs now offering not only courses in entrepreneurship, but also specializations in entrepreneurship. And there are an increasing number of universities actually offering majors in entrepreneurship. It's still not as many as we would like. And I checked it's a somewhat outdated statistic, but I believe it was something like about 15% of people who teach entrepreneurship have actual doctorates in entrepreneurship. So you're looking at the other 85% that are teaching entrepreneurship but do not have a doctorate in entrepreneurship. And I reflect upon my second employer. There were two of us that taught no, that's not true. There were three of us that taught entrepreneurship. One of them left. That's why I kind of forgot him. But one of them had a degree in finance, and he taught entrepreneurship. The other one had a degree in human resources, doctorates in finance and human resources, and he taught entrepreneurship. And then I had my degree in entrepreneurship, and ironically, I started teaching business ethics, and then I eventually moved into teaching entrepreneurship at that institution. So there's a lot of people teaching entrepreneurship out there, but don't actually have a formal education in entrepreneurship. And this, in my opinion, causes a lot of problems, right? If someone actually publishes in the field of entrepreneurship, then maybe it becomes a little bit more legitimate, but most of the time they don't even have publications in that field. At my second employer, I remember there was a doctoral candidate. He'd actually dropped out of his PhD program, and he was in sociology. And he was actually lecturing in entrepreneurship, and what he was saying, while it was interesting and colorful, was not backed empirically by any sort of research at all. At another employer, there was a gentleman who had a degree in management, and he taught a lot of concepts in entrepreneurship, and I thought it was just nonsense, that none of it was backed up by personal experience or research or anything. And so I think those of you that are watching this video, whether you're my students or any other students of entrepreneurship anywhere else you go, you do have to be very critical, right? And ask those tough questions. Well, where is this found in the research? What experiences back this up? It's even more problematic because of the fact that so many things in entrepreneurship don't have real definitions. As you've probably watched in my other video series on Introduction to Entrepreneurship, there is no definition of entrepreneurship that is universally accepted. There's no universally accepted definition of opportunity or entrepreneurial opportunity. There's no universally accepted definition of the relationship between entrepreneurship and opportunity. So when you don't even have basic agreement on those kinds of foundational definitional concepts, it can be very hard to generalize and have any sort of a solid curriculum in entrepreneurship. Now, I don't think that's because entrepreneurship is a new field. I think it's the nature of the discipline itself. To actually define something that is entrepreneurship, in my opinion, is very much the study of outliers, right? The mainstream are the managers and the worker bees. Entrepreneurs are outliers, and it's very hard to generalize when you are studying just outliers. And so I don't think there will ever be definitions of these terms, right? Nonetheless, there are people out there who will say, hey, this is the only way to define entrepreneurship. Again, at a previous employer, there was an adjunct who taught some classes. He had an MBA, I think, from, I don't want to say where it was from because you'll figure out pretty quickly who he is. But he had an MBA from a top 20 U.S. business school, and he'd been a successful entrepreneur for about 15 years. Nonetheless, he was unfamiliar with basic pedagogy, like how to write a syllabus and how to teach, and he didn't know anything about the entrepreneurship literature. And I remember he failed a student because she wrote a paper about entrepreneurship and she used her family dry cleaning business as an example, and he failed her and he said, no, you and your family are not entrepreneurs, they are small and medium-sized enterprise managers. Well, I mean, there's nothing in the literature really to support saying that that person is not an entrepreneur. It's those definitions just don't exist. So this is what makes entrepreneurship education challenging. I think, and some of the things that I've heard are so absurd. It's the equivalent of my looking at the cover of a National Geographic magazine and then running around and telling everybody that suddenly I'm a marine biologist. Everybody has heard something about entrepreneurs in the media, or maybe they know some entrepreneurs or something like this. They have some vague knowledge, and then therefore they become experts without actually going through the steps, without actually getting a degree in entrepreneurship, taking formal education in entrepreneurship, etc. That, however, leads to the 3 research questions in this article. And for those of you that are following along, it's on page 107. This ambiguity leads to these 3 research questions. And I'm not a fan of reading, but I think it's important, right? So here's the first question is, can entrepreneurship be taught at all? There's a lot of people that'll say no on that. And you have to think about it. There are people who have no formal training or education in entrepreneurship, but they're successful entrepreneurs. But does that mean that they are capable of teaching what they have learned as entrepreneurs to other people? Is their experience generalizable or replicable? And that's when we come to the second question. Can entrepreneurship be taught at all? And if so, is the university an appropriate place to offer this teaching? And some people also say no again. So the alternative might be that no, you can't learn entrepreneurship at a university, but you can only learn through an apprenticeship. You can't learn it all, it's just dumb block. There's all sorts of other counter explanations. And that leads us to the 3rd research question of this article. And it says, if the university is an appropriate place to teach entrepreneurship, but the business school is the wrong place within the university to house these studies, where should they go? In other words, maybe entrepreneurship should not be part of a business department. Maybe entrepreneurship needs to be its own department, or maybe it needs to be taught like a humanities subject. There's lots and lots of different answers that I'm going to talk about in this particular video series. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this particular discussion, and in our next video we're going to talk about a very important concept. It's teaching entrepreneurship versus teaching about entrepreneurship. In other words, we're going to address the first research question of this article. Can entrepreneurship be taught? I'm looking forward to seeing the next video, and as always, make sure you give me a thumbs up if you like these videos, subscribe, and make sure you give me some comments. Looking forward to seeing the next video.